like Pete said, my name is Morgan Russell, and I'm the Extension Range Specialist in San Angelo. This is actually my first webinar, so I'm very thankful to have Pete helping me out on the technology side of things. They don't come much better than him, and I'm probably speaking for all the specialists when we say we really appreciate all that you do for us. So thank you for tuning in today and for watching and listening to today's Texas Range webinar, where we are going to be diving into the Brush Busters program and discussing how and why the program was developed, different equipment options, individual plant treatment methods, where to find the Brush Buster information, and examples of species found within those Brush Buster publications or within that publication series. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, type them into the chat box and I'll be sure and get to them. We will have a few Q&A breaks throughout this presentation, and that'll give us an opportunity to address some of those questions so we don't get too far ahead of ourselves as we go throughout this talk. So what is Brush Busters? Brush Busters is a cooperative program of the Texas AgriLife Research and Extension Service, strictly for brush control and those problematic species. We use individual plant treatments with the Brush Buster methods. These methods are pretty straightforward, easy to follow and understand, even for those who have very little or no experience with brush control. And all of these recommended treatments are safe and effective, as well as cost effective. Brush Buster methods recommend only select treatments capable of killing generally 7 out of every 10 plants treated. And more importantly, Brush Buster methods make every attempt to keep equipment costs low and complexity to a minimum, and whenever possible to use non-restricted herbicides. For example, we follow that KISS method of keeping everything simple and straightforward. The Brush Busters program has several crucial partners associated with its development and its continued success. Texas A&M AgriLife Extension and Research Service, Dow AgroSciences, DuPont, Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, and the NRCS. The Brush Buster series can be found online at www.agrilifebookstore.org. Just find the search bar on this website and type in Brush Busters, and it will pull up every single publication that we have in the series. Also, one-page pamphlets, hard copies, are available from most county extension offices that outline all of those Brush Buster methods. Perhaps one of the biggest benefits of Brush Busters, and one of the most recognizable aspects of it, is that it is extremely cost effective. For example, early control on brush species is approximately $10 an acre, as compared to more of a expensive reclamation type of treatment that can start anywhere at $200 and increase from there. The Brush Buster series encompasses a variety of species such as Cedar, Huisache, McCartney Rose, Mesquite, Pricklypear, Salt Cedar, Chinese Tallow Tree, Yucca, Cedar, Greenbrier, and the Cut Stump method. And all of these are available at the bookstore website. All of those pamphlets are PDF copies, electronic copies of these recommendations for treatment of these species. So let's first look at the Brush Buster recommendations for controlling mesquite. And what exactly are we looking to target when we are focusing on such a prolific roof sprouting species? So we are specifically targeting the bud zone on a mesquite, which can be rather extensive. Buds can be seen to the first lateral root, which is more than 12 inches below ground, as indicated by this 12-inch ruler. So right in through there, those are all dormant, or considered the dormant bud zone. And this is just another picture indicating how large and extensive that dormant bud zone is below the soil surface. As I mentioned before, this is one of the primary reasons why it's so successful as a prolific resprouting species. Probably the biggest thing about mesquite is, even with these brush buster treatments and these individual plant treatments, is that complete eradication is really never possible. And these types of treatments will need to be revisited frequently. It actually turns into quite a lifelong hobby. And so with that introduction of what brush busters is and kind of a general overview of what mesquite is, do we have any questions? It looks like Megan took care of a question from Dawn concerning controlling bee brush. Dawn's question is, will you address controlling bee brush or white brush? Megan answered and said, our only treatment recommendation is the spike pellet, and it is a very tough species, but we don't have a brush busters publication on it yet. Any more questions? Okay, great. We'll keep going then. All right, let's move into stem sprays for mesquite. Stem sprays work best when the target species, mesquite, is actively growing and if there are 3 or fewer stems per individual. For stem sprays, a backpack sprayer works extremely well. This picture right here on the screen is a Solo brand backpack with an aftermarket shoulder harness. And you can easily tell the difference between this aftermarket shoulder harness and the standard one that comes with it, especially if you're at the end of the summer and you've been doing a lot of IPT work or spraying. What also saves you for stem sprays is this long 24-inch wand, so you're not constantly bending over as much, and of course using the appropriate nozzles for this type of spray application. If you are using the wrong type of nozzle, for example, like the one in this picture, this is an original fan nozzle. A majority of the herbicide that is applied with this on a stem spray application will be wasted and really not even end up on the stem itself. So it's very important that we find the right nozzle and pair that with the appropriate application. So for those stem sprays, we recommend using a Cone Jet 5500 X1 nozzle for mesquite stem sprays, and stay away from those fan nozzles that put out a fine mist, for example, the X8 nozzle. It's also important to make sure that the screen or the check valve for mesquite stem spray is in place, because it prevents clogging and dripping from that nozzle. We recommend 100 mesh brass with a stainless steel screen. The mix that we typically use for these mesquite stem sprays uses the active ingredient Pricklypear or Remedy. And that solution consists of 15 to 25% Pricklypear plus 75 to 85% diesel or vegetable oil. You can use either one. And you want to make sure that when you're spraying, you wet all the stems, especially all the way around, so 360 degrees around that stem, and from the surface to or the ground line to about 12 inches up. And you can stem spray any time of the year. However, it works best if it's actively growing and with this particular mix, there is no soil activity. Now, stem sprays for that rough bark mix require 25% Pricklypear plus 75% diesel. And that's on that rough bark mesquite. Okay, we're going to take a break and do a quick polling question just to make sure you guys are still hanging with us. So the question is, how many stems per plant are best for the stem spray method? A, 1 to 3, B, 4 to 7, C, no different. And we've got votes trickling in. It looks like you guys are nailing it. It's 1 to 3 stems or fewer, 3 or fewer for the stem spray method. As you increase in that stem density, if you get anything above 3, it basically just becomes, it's no longer economically effective to implement that stem spray method. And you'd be looking more at of a broadcast or any other type of application other than the stem spray. All right, good job on that one. Okay, moving on to leaf sprays using those recommendations from brush busters for mesquite. There are a variety of different equipment options. For example, pump-up garden sprayers that I have found at Lowe's or Home Depot from anywhere from $30 to $40. You can also use those backpack sprayers like the Solo brand that I mentioned earlier. You can use an ATV or a UTV mounted sprayer rig, which you can hook up with longer hoses and have multiple guns, so you can have 2 or 3 people out there spraying if necessary. And for leaf spraying on mesquite, we recommend an X8 nozzle, and this puts out a good fan mist, which will ensure consistent and adequate coverage for the foliar spray. So you want to stay away from that finer or from the coarser nozzle that we used for the stem sprays. Mesquite IPT leaf spray ingredients are typically mixed in water as a carrier, including a non-ionic surfactant and blue dye to distinguish which trees have been treated. Mesquite leaf spray is 0.5% of remedy, 0.5% reclaim, 0.25% surfactant, and 0.25% dye. And for the recommendations for spraying, we recommend that you spray to wet after the leaves turn a dark green. And this spray window is typically 45 days after bud break. And this can go as far into a September month, but it always varies from year to year. Not every year is going to be the same for the spray window. So I recommend that you make sure you're getting out and you're looking at your target species that you're going to spray and not just go by a specific calendar date. The timing of application is very important for these foliar sprays due to a carbohydrate flow and that particular energy pattern for this species. So when mesquite leaves are a light lime green color, for example, in this picture right here, you can see those leaves are very immature and have probably just started growing. When they're that light lime green color, this means that all that plants or that mesquite individual's energy sources are being translocated up for active leaf growth and development. So if herbicide treatments are applied during this time, they will not be very effective because it simply will not be carried down below the soil surface into that crucial bud zone that we are looking to specifically target to prevent future resprouting from those dormant buds. However, later on in the phenology stage, those leaves will mature into a dark green color, which means that translocation of carbohydrates is being carried back down into the root system, which means that that herbicide will also be taken down into the root system and extended throughout that bud zone. Before I get any further, I want to also mention that Sendero is also an option for mesquite leaf spray. The mix ratio for that is 1%, and it's generally more consistent than the previous herbicide mix that I mentioned. So timing implications for leaf sprays are pretty crucial, and there is no definite spray window. There is a definite spray window. Soil temperature needs to be greater than 75 degrees, or right at 75 degrees. The leaves, of course, need to be all dark green in color with no new growth, and leaves must be healthy and free of insect damage or frost damage as well. And sometimes we can see a flush of new growth after a major rain event, which is not a good time to spray due to that carbohydrate flow pattern that I mentioned earlier. So the brush busters recommendations can work very well in harmony with a previous mechanical disturbance or prescribed fire as a maintenance type of treatment. However, if implementing a foliar spray, general recommendations are to wait until at least the third growing season post-disturbance to start spraying. Okay, so let's take another polling question. Let's say, for example, leaf damage does occur. Is it possible to still implement a leaf spray if there is less than 25% leaf area damage? And I'll give you guys a few minutes or seconds to answer that polling question. Okay, the votes are trickling in, and it looks like a majority of you, or 68% of you, voted true, and 32% of you voted false. Okay, some folks are still voting. Okay. So the answer to this is true. It actually is still possible to implement a leaf spray if there is less than 25% area damage. But if you are approaching that 25% benchmark or greater than that, it's simply just not as effective because you don't have the leaf tissue area to soak up that herbicide. And you'd be better off to wait for more desirable conditions where your herbicide treatment has a higher chance of success. Okay, I've been seeing some comments or questions trickling in, and so we'll take a time to answer some of those right now. Starting with Kathy, she said, please address when you should stop spraying and then starting again after a big rain. Really, when we get those big rain showers, Kathy, it really kind of fouls up the consistency of the phenology of those mesquite trees that we're looking to target. And if it's a big rain and we see a flush of a lot of new growth, I would actually just recommend you wait until the following year for more consistent growing conditions where all of your mesquite are at the same stage and it's a more consistent spraying condition. Okay, Mike asked, what is the recommended treatment for Texas persimmon or Mexican persimmon. Mike, I think I'm going to have to get back with you on that unless Dr. Lyons or Dr. Clayton want to chime in on that. Dr. Lyons also mentioned that Sendero is an option for mesquite leaf spray. It is more consistent. Is there a cost consideration between Sendero and Remedy? I don't really know the price of Sendero right off the top of my head, so I will also get back to you on that, or Dr. Lyons or Clayton can chime in and help me out with that one. Kathy also wrote Sendero is a little bit more expensive, but not as much. And Dr. Lyons also made the comment that you can still use 25% Pricklypear as a basal spray or cut Stump at 15%. Okay, good. Looks like we're getting some good discussions and okay, James Jackson, our specialist in Stevensville, mentioned that anytime I have compared the numbers on Remedy and Reclaim, Sendero is cheaper. Okay, good. Well, thank you, Dr. Lyons and Clayton and James for helping me out with those questions. I appreciate it. Okay, we'll keep moving on here with our talk. So moving on to Huisache. Leaf spray treatment for this species is actually pretty similar to mesquite. Soil temperature thresholds need to be 75 degrees or higher, and Grazon P+D or Gunslinger is typically used with a surfactant or an MSO with a dye and used with water as the carrier. I would really recommend, I just want to make this point too, it is very much worth it to invest into a non-ionic surfactant solution, especially one with a high active ingredient. If you're looking to use dish soap or anything like that, of course that can always work in a pinch, but since you're going to all this trouble and investing in these chemicals and herbicides, we recommend that you also just invest into a surfactant. Most of the time it breaks down the water tension much more consistently than any other type of dish soap or other solution. So for Huisache leaf spray, the recommended mix is 1% Grazon P+D or Gunslinger with 1/4% of surfactant and 1/4% dye. Equipment consists of a backpack or an ATV or UTV sprayer similar to that mesquite equipment. And we recommend using an X6 or an X8 nozzle. And you can spray during the spring or the fall, making sure that you have adequate soil temperature conditions, so 75 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, and adequate soil moisture. And you want to spray until those leaves glisten. You don't need to spray it till they're wet and dripping, but just making sure you get consistent coverage on all of the foliar tissue. So stem spray mix on Huisache consists of Pricklypear or Remedy mixed with diesel. And we recommend using 15 to 25% Pricklypear with 75 to 85% diesel, and like I said, with an X1 nozzle for that stem spray work. You want to spray each stem lightly, getting full coverage, 360 degrees around that stem. And this stem spray method has a pretty flexible window throughout all seasons. Okay, moving on to how to master cedar with brush busters. So when we're talking about cedar, we have two major species, red-berry juniper and ash juniper. And in this picture, the one on the left is red-berry juniper, and the one on the right is ash juniper. sometimes it can be pretty tricky to tell these two species apart. Even though these two species are very similar looking, they have very different growth forms. And I know this picture doesn't really do it justice, but if you look closely, you can distinguish those two different growth forms. So it's very important to know which species you have, and not just lump it into one big juniper. It's very important to distinguish between red and ash juniper or blueberry juniper because those treatments vary based on their growth form. So as the names imply, blueberry cedar has blueberries and redberry cedar has redberries. Blueberry cedar is more common in central and south central Texas, while redberry is more common in the west and west central Texas, as well as in parts of north central Texas. Although, like you can see here in this picture, it's not at all uncommon for these two species to occur together. So the easiest way to distinguish between the two is to look at not only the growth form, but to also look at the leaves very closely. Redberry juniper typically has a white wax coating with these white flakes that you see here. And blueberry does not. The bud zone for redberry is pretty extensive because it is a re-sprouting species. So all of these buds here are just very tightly clustered together, and they constitute the dormant bud zone for this particular individual. Brushbuster recommends 3 ways or different ways to control cedar. 2 herbicide treatments, soil spot spray and a leaf spray, work best on cedar that are less than 3 feet tall. Soil spot spray treatments should be applied with an exact delivery handgun. And this handgun delivers a thin stream of a predetermined volume when you pull the trigger. And you can adjust the handgun to deliver 2 mils for each pull of the trigger, or 2 cc's for each pull of the trigger. If only a few plants are to be treated, a disposable syringe can also work, and is probably a little bit more, or just as effective. Velpar L is the recommended herbicide for soil spot sprays to control cedar. And this herbicide is undiluted, or is used undiluted by, like I said, attaching that exact hand delivery gun or the syringe, or just filling a syringe from the herbicide container. Velpar is very active in the soil, so there's a large potential for damage to occur to non-target species. For example, this juniper in the lower left-hand corner probably received 2 cc's of Velpar and was treated. But that Velpar became mobile in the soil, maybe after a large rain event or something like that, and it went off target to the live oak tree, and you can see the damage that occurred from that just 1 year post-treatment. Okay, let's move on to the leaf spray for cedar using brush busters. Cedar leaf spray works on blueberry and or redberry that again are less than 3 feet tall. So we're not dealing with mature individuals at all. Prepare that spray mix using 1% concentration of Tordon 22K in water. And to ensure a thorough coating of those cedar leaves, again, we recommend 1/4% surfactant and 1/4% dye being added to the spray mix to make sure that you're marking the plants that have been sprayed. And the purchase of Tordon 22K requires a pesticide applicator's license from the Texas Department of Agriculture. So if you need more information on that, please consult your county extension agent and they can get you the information that you need to attain a license. So the key to successful juniper control program is management of these new seedlings. And this is where Brush Busters was really meant for and where the rubber meets the road for the Brush Buster recommendations. These new seedlings are easier to manage, especially after following an initial reclamation treatment. For example, fire is one of the most effective methods for ash juniper or blueberry juniper. And if you are still dealing with the seedling problem after that, you can certainly do a follow-up treatment after that prescribed burn and clean up these remaining seedlings with any type of foliar application. Okay, so let's go to our third polling question. Blueberry juniper, this is a true or false one. Blueberry juniper is a resprouting species. So we just talked about two of the major species that we deal with, redberry juniper and blueberry or ash juniper. The votes are coming in. They're pretty well split, believe it or not. 48% of you say true, and 50% of you say false. I'll give you guys a couple more seconds to click your vote. And Kathy, yep, I see your question. Ash is the same as blueberry. Okay, so blueberry juniper is a resprouting species. 50% of you say true and 50% of you say false. And the answer to this is false. Blueberry juniper is not a resprouting species. However, redberry juniper is a prolific resprouting species. So when we are looking to implement some type of treatment, when we're dealing with blueberry, we can use fire as an effective tool, and we can use that as any type of reclamation type of treatment, and then certainly follow it up with a herbicide treatment using the Brush Busters recommendations for individual plant treatment work. Okay, moving on to Brush Buster recommendations for Pricklypear. Brush Busters methods involve spraying a small but very potent concentration of herbicide directly onto the Pricklypear pads. And remember that controlling Pricklypear, and these recommendations can also be for any other type of cactus. It's not a one-time job. There are very many viable seeds in the soil that can germinate in the future. And livestock and wildlife also spread these seeds and scatter the pads and joints over very wide areas. So this is, again, I don't want to say it, but it needs to kind of turn into a hobby where you're continuously revisiting your pastures that have these problematic species such as Pricklypear in them, and stay on top of those seedlings that sprout up from probably from pretty much residual seeds in the soil profile or from livestock and wildlife carrying it from other pastures. Actually, we'll keep going on to that. So, so to prepare that mix, you want to add 1% concentration of surmount to water. And to ensure a thorough coating of those waxy pads or stems, add either a non-ionic surfactant. Actually, that's what you do want to add is a non-ionic surfactant and 1/4% dye. This dye, again, is very helpful in marking those plants that have been treated and to also tell if you are getting an adequate amount of coverage on those green pads. An alternative to surmount is the use of 22K. And yes, I have a typo on this slide. So you can spray any time of the year, but best before expected rainfall and above 60 degrees Fahrenheit, not 600. Thank you for picking that up. Vista is also can also work well on a pear that, or on Pricklypear. The reason for this is that it is non-restricted use, so it's great if you've got a Pricklypear problem but have no pesticide applicator's license. And we recommend that you apply during late summer or early fall. Okay, and we'll take some time for some questions if there are any. Let me scroll up here and see what we. Okay, yep, ash is the same as blueberry. Would you recommend spot spraying? Okay, hang on. Would you recommend spot spraying Chinese tallow trees that are about to drop their berries before treating the younger trees that are not producing seeds yet? I am going to have to get back with you on that, or have James Jackson or Dr. Lyons or Dr. Clayton chime in on that one. Clint asks, how do you measure soil temperature? We measure soil temperature using a soil temperature probe, and I think it's about 12 inches long. What works best is to drill some type of pilot hole and then insert that soil thermometer into that pilot hole. I'm pretty sure you can purchase these soil temperature thermometers or soil thermometers from like forestry suppliers or any type of forestry website or anything like that. But obtaining one or getting a good idea of what type of soil temperature you're dealing with needs to go hand in hand with your treatment applications to get a very good idea of what those soil conditions are prior to spraying. I think you can also get soil temperature ranges from the National Weather Service database from those different National Weather Service towers that they have set up throughout the state, and that's just accessible on their website. If you dig mesquite below the root bud zone, will the rest of the roots die? Mesquite has a pretty prolific root zone, and even though a majority of those dormant buds are clustered, right there before the first lateral root, those roots can extend well into 3 feet below the soil surface. So if you do dig up that mesquite below the root bud zone, I would not say with 100% certainty that the rest of the roots will die. There could be lateral buds on those roots that are capable of producing more seeds or resprouting too. Actually, okay, Dr. Lyons said it will not resprout from just roots. But the tricky part would be to get all of those dormant buds. Okay, following successful herbicide treatment for cedar on mesquite or mesquite, would you consider chaining or piling the dead tree skeletons to open up the pasture? Absolutely, Randy. I think that that's a strategy that a lot of people or a lot of folks are using here in West Central Texas near San Angelo. If you do decide to use that, At one point, you are going to have to get rid of those skeletons, whether it's through pile burning or any other type of pile situation, I guess. But a lot of times those dead tree skeletons will provide a lot of wildlife habitat as well. So I wouldn't suggest getting rid of every single dead tree skeleton that you have if wildlife habitat is part of your overall objectives or goals. Okay, we'll keep pushing on here and moving forward. And again, thank you to the other rangers.
There was one more question.
Oh, okay.
The question was, um, if diesel is not mentioned as a carrier, is a default
Yes.
water.
Correct. Yep. And thank you for.
And the other question was, can you add diesel to help break down the pad surface?
I'm gonna let Dr. Lyons or James answer that one. I'm not totally sure on that. Okay, moving on. So Brushbusters has a lot of general recommendations for these resprouting species, and that's through cut stump treatment. So most of these woody plants resprout profusely from below ground crowns or roots if the above ground growth is damaged or removed. And because these sprouts grow very rapidly, removing the above ground growth of these plants with pruning shears, chainsaws, axes, hydraulic shears, shredding, or fire often intensifies these woody plant problems. So a high percentage of these plants can be killed. However, if you follow it up with spraying the stump after removing it with a specific herbicide treatment immediately after cutting it. And this is the basis for our cut stump treatment method. So I'm going to be sharing two three-step ways to control many species of these woody plants by spraying a small but potent concentration of herbicide directly onto these stumps after you remove them. So cut stump for hardwood species consists of a mix that is 15% Pricklypear and 85% diesel fuel or vegetable oil, and this works best on species like blackbrush, catclaw, elm, hackberry, loatbrush, and others, as you can see on the list here. So application with this consists of removing that top growth using pruning shears, axe, or hydraulic shears, and then immediately following it with herbicide spray with either a pumped up garden sprayer, like I mentioned earlier, those backpack sprayers, or a sprayer mounted onto a four-wheeler, ATV, or UTV, or onto those hydraulic shears. And the good thing about this method is that it can be done any time of the year. So for the application method for this, we recommend that you cut every stem close to the soil surface, avoid leaving any soil on that cut stump, and spray immediately after cutting. Sometimes folks will ask us, can we spray a week later or the next day? And we just recommend making it a 1-2 punch and cutting it and spraying it in an order immediately after cutting it. And then you want to adjust the nozzle to deliver a coarse mix so you're getting consistent herbicide over that entire stump. You don't need to have it dripping off the sides. It just needs to be on the top layer of it. And make sure you spray it consistently on the stump, so getting into that cambium layer. Especially those outer edges as well. Also, when you are cutting these stumps, try to cut them as flat as possible, so your chemical, if you were to cut it on a slant or on an angle, and then follow it up with spraying, most of your herbicide will just drip off of it because it's on an angle. So try to cut it as flat as possible. We use the ConeJet 5500 X1 to X3 nozzle, but that differs if you are using it attached to a hydraulic shear lift with a skid steer. We recommend using an X12 nozzle. Also, when cutting the stumps, make sure, like I said, it is a flat cut to ensure that herbicide stays in place. And try to cut it as close to the ground as possible. For those hydraulic shears on skid steer loaders, try not to cut below the soil surface, and also place the nozzle directly over the cut stump. The cut stump treatment method is a very successful method, ensuring almost 100% plant mortality if it's done correctly. So, like I said, this is a very reliable treatment method for our resprouting species, but you need to make sure that you're implementing it correctly as far as the top growth removal goes and the follow-up application of herbicide. If there is not adequate coverage on the stump, then these resprouting issues, like the ones in these pictures, can occur quite easily. And you can see those are resprouting from those outer edges. So it's very important you get consistent coverage over the entire stump after you remove that top growth. And a majority of the time, these cut stump treatments are only as good as the workmanship and the consistency of the operator. So if you are going to invest in this type of method, especially if you're using a skid steer or any type of mechanical shear, you know, most of the times removing that top growth is sometimes the easiest part. Then spraying those remaining stumps sometimes gets overlooked. So just make sure you're doing a very thorough job when spraying that stump. Okay, so let's review some of the points or the take-home messages that we talked about when covering the brush busters material. Current species covered by brush busters consist of mesquite, cedar, pricklypear, Chinese tallow tree, green briar, yucca, salt cedar, Huisache, Hartley rose, and of course the cut stump treatment that we just talked about. All of the brush buster information can be found at the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Bookstore, and this website is www.agrilifebookstore.org. And also, we have a lot more information on that bookstore website besides just the brush buster information. So this is an excellent source of all of AgriLife Extension materials and all of our education bulletins that we put out. I would recommend bookmarking this. It's a very good source of information. And good news, Brush Busters has also transitioned from VHS tapes and is now on YouTube. So this, all of these Brush Buster publications can be found as a video on YouTube, and they're located under ESSM Extension, which, like I said, covers all of this Brush Buster material. And it's very informative information, and it's also free and just at your fingertips on YouTube. Okay, so with that, it only seems fitting to leave you all with a quote from the 1984 hit Ghostbusters of Holden, Smokin', and Ready. So thank you all for listening. And if you have any more questions, just type them in that chat box and we'll get to them as they come in. Looks like James is doing a good job of helping me out. Thank you so much, James. We've got one question. Does it matter how close to the ground you cut the tree? And James said no, as long as you spray the cut area, you are good. But we do recommend that you cut as close to the soil surface as possible, just because leaving those tall, high stumps, that just leaves more opportunity for resprouting. Okay, best way or time to treat resprout to finish the kill. Kathy, is that after a cut stump method? Okay, we'll come back to that one. Karen asked, I've heard that if you cut stump cedar, you don't have to spray it. Is that true? Okay, so like we talked about earlier, it depends on what species you're dealing with. Like James has said, whether it's ash juniper or blueberry juniper versus that resprouting species of redberry. So ash, remember, ash juniper or blueberry juniper, they go by the same name, or those both, they go by those two names, will not resprout, but redberry definitely will. So if you're cut stumping redberry, it needs to be followed up with a herbicide application. Okay, what about greenbrier? We didn't have enough time to talk about greenbrier, but like I said, you can go to our bookstore website, AgriLife bookstore website, and we've got all of our Fuss Busters information on greenbrier. And looks like that might be the end of our questions. Okay. Pete, does it look like I'm missing any questions?
No, ma'am. I was looking through them. I think you got them all. So thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Russell. So we'll sit here and see any more questions come in. And as the questions come in, let me go ahead and say that here in a little bit, you're going to go ahead and get a satisfaction survey pop up on your window. Please answer that survey. It really helps us improve our webinars, and we want to bring you those good webinars, and hopefully the software as well as we're making it really easy. The next upcoming webinar is going to be November the 6th, and Dr. Bob Lyons is going to be our speaker, Extension Range Specialist, Associate Department Head, and he's going to be talking about how livestock eat, understanding grazing and animal behavior for improved livestock and resource management. So I'm looking forward to listening to that. So, and then at the end here we have is you can follow us on Facebook under facebook.com/txrange. And a bunch of videos that Dr. Russell mentioned are linked to that page as well as some videos on reseeding and some cut stumps as well, how to cut stumps. So if you go to that page, there'll be all these brush buster videos linked there as well. So follow us there. Dr. Russell, thank you, and I'm going to go ahead and see what comes up. In the meantime, I'm going to pop out a satisfaction survey for the folks. So if it covers up your screen, just minimize it, and your screen will show up as well. If by some chance the screen covered up there, the survey covered up your screen, if you look down your taskbar, you see a little green icon with three little fellers. Just click on it, and it'll bring you back to the webinar. Dr. Russell?
Yes.
There's a question. There's a question there from. Let me see here. I'm scrolling up. I saw it, but I hadn't been answered. David T. The question is there information on control of? Do you see that one from David T?
Yes. Okay. You know, I was trying to do a quick search of it, just barely to see if we had any type of that information. And I couldn't find any, but that is definitely something that we can maybe look into older types of publications to see if there's any out there. Okay, and James also makes the comment for greenbrier, 20% remedy, 80% diesel. Doing a stem spray is the recommended brush buster method for greenbrier. Clint, you asked about a hardware store knowing about these different nozzle types. I don't know if your general hardwood store would know about these different nozzles. I purchase all of my nozzles through Wiley Implement. That store is located in Abilene. And also you can probably find them online through I think Wiley Implement also has a website as well.